Greetings, you curiouser and curiouser Herle Burlyites. I'll just say it. We'd be hard-pressed to find a more relevant or newsworthy topic than what we're going to talk about today. Israel, Hamas, and the war on Gaza. The rise of antisemitism. With me to do that is Israeli Ambassador to Canada, Iddo Moed. Ambassador Moed has been in the post since August of last year. Immediately prior, he was the deputy head of African affairs for Israel's foreign ministry, and he spent 10 years working in cybersecurity for the Israeli government, which is perhaps why you can't find out much about him on the internet. So the bulk of this pod will be spent exploring some of the more, frankly, uncomfortable questions on people's minds. Why did the war in Gaza have to be fought in this manner? How does it end? What's going to happen with the hostages? And what comes next? And what are the response here in Canada and North America, both from government and in our culture? Ambassador Moed, I think this is going to be a really valuable conversation, and I thank you for coming on the pod today. But I'm going to open up, well, let me just start with this. First of all, I'll just warm up with you, right? How is Ottawa? You're new there. You've been there for a year. Is spring arrived?
Oh, first of all, David, thank you for having me on your show. Well, speaking of warm start, yes, it's been a very mild winter and a very pleasant spring. So as far as the weather is concerned, the welcoming is great. Of course, other things are overshadowing that, but welcome in Ottawa has been excellent. Absolutely.
All right. Well, wait a second. That's way too positive. Okay, because I lived in Ottawa for 20 years. So let's play a game. You and I want to play a game with you. Complete this sentence. The best thing about living in Ottawa is?
It's a beautiful, green, pleasant, no traffic jams city with very pleasant people.
There you go. I think the correct answer is its proximity to Montreal.
Okay. Not bad. Yeah.
Right.
I like that, but I really appreciate very much the space and the pleasant atmosphere. I've lived in The Hague in the Netherlands. It reminds me a little bit of that. It's a government city, you can tell. There's perhaps something to say about that, but people are just very easygoing, and it's great to be here.
All right, let's complete another sentence, okay? Shot through the heart, and you're to blame.
Oh, you give love. Wow, that escapes me. Wow, that's a good
bad
one.
name.
a bad name. Yes, sorry. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I ask you this because there's nothing about you on the internet, yet in your Twitter profile, you want people to know you like Bon Jovi.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. Yeah. It's a good one. A bad name. Yeah.
All right. Listen, to start this interview off, full disclosure, I was in Israel for my 5th time with members of CIJA earlier this year to bear witness to the impacts of the Hamas attacks on October 7th. Yeah. The people I met with who had been in some way directly affected were justifiably traumatized. More surprisingly, perhaps, was the psychological impact on the whole country that I found when I was there. And it wasn't just the anger that was in America after 9/11, although there was certainly plenty of that. But there was also something deeper and more complex in the Israeli reaction to the attacks. Can you talk a little bit about how October 7th affected Israel?
Great question, David. I was there in March, and so I was walking through the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and seeing the people, and it was close to Purim. You know, Purim is a very funny festival, very happy costumes and stuff. And usually, long before Purim, you already see the preparations in the street, and you see the colors, and people are selling stuff and all of that. There was nothing of that. People feel subdued. People feel that you can really sense that the country's been through a shock. And as time progresses, every day, actually, still, I was 7 months after. Every day, new stories come out about the horrific events that took place. There is so much that is going still to come out about the atrocities. And there are several things to speak about when you're talking about these atrocities. First of all, on a human level, stories. It's loved ones, people that are dear to us that have been hurt horrifically. in so many ways. Second is nationally, what does it mean for us for Israelis to have undergone such horrific event, which is described as the worst since the Holocaust? It means that we are much more vulnerable than we thought. It means that our fears, our existential fears, which have dominated much of our development since the establishment of the state, that they are real, that there are still out there some people who absolutely want just to kill us. And this is a horrifying thought, that you look around you and you realize that you're not as safe as you thought you were. And that sense of insecurity also translates itself into social issues, to political issues, a lot of pressures inside the country about how we should proceed. The military is Tahal, the IDF. Is it as strong as we thought it was? I mean, the question came out, not only was there some problem with analysis of our intelligence and translating it into some kind of defense. That was one thing that was wrong. The second part was, where was the IDF after the attack started for hours? So the insecurity is, you can sense that everywhere, the loss, the sense of loss, the trauma. And what I found also very striking is that this sense of trauma is not only, it doesn't exist only in Israel, it also exists among Jewish communities here in Canada, and I think it also in other parts of the world. Because if Israel is seen as a sort of as an insurance policy, all of a sudden you realize, hey, there may be a problem there. So there is a big issue here. And when you walk around Israel, you see the resilience. I always love to speak about the resilience because there is a lot. And I'll say a few words about that. But first, we have to focus and understand that this trauma that we've experienced, as I said, translates itself into other fields, politics and others. And it has implications that are difficult to convey to others around the world. And this is why it's important for me to focus on this a little bit just now, because we have a complete faith in our system, in our democracy, in the military, in our defense. IDF is doing a good job in Gaza. They are operating and they are working to eradicate Hamas. We'll speak about that as well. But the point is that we sense that something very significant, very substantial didn't work on October the 7th. Is it a symptom? Is it a symptom of what? So the better part for me, at least, is the resilience issue. You see that the whole society comes together very quickly, everybody, Jews and non-Jews. That's very important to stress. Israeli Arabs, Christians, Bedouins, Druze, Cherkess, everybody came together, actually on the day itself, on October the 7th. Some of them were the ambulance drivers that drove into fire to get people out of harm's way. Some of them were medical staff in hospitals. Some of them were taxi drivers. Everybody was pitching in. Everybody was working together. And that sense that civil society is working towards an aim, we understand that, all of us understand that Israel is under threat. Our Israel, each and everyone has a different idea of what my Israel is. But that was under threat from Hamas, and nobody wanted to have that happen. So everybody pitched in and continue to do that today, civil organizations and so on. So there is a very strong sense of empowerment of civil society that they can do, that can make a difference, that did make a difference and continue to make a difference for Israel's resilience. And that's the upside. And you see a lot of that also happening in Israel. But everybody is less cheerful. Everybody is less happy. We are still digesting this trauma.
Okay. On October the 8th, Israel had the sympathy of most citizens in Western countries. But there's been widespread disapproval since among people who believe that Israel has a right to exist and has a right to defend itself. Widespread disapproval about the way that Israel has chosen to defend itself. Why has the Israeli government prosecuted this war in a way that has resulted in so much destruction and casualties in Gaza?
It's a question that I hear a lot, and there are several aspects to it. First, to talk about the ratio. Okay, is it how destructive is this war as compared to what? Second is to think about the whole concept of having this war. And the third is, what have we attained? What have we reached? What objective did we reach so far? What is still ahead of us? So let's talk about the relativity aspect, proportions. Israeli military didn't start this operation until 3 weeks after October the 7th. We prepared plans, we prepared the troops, we trained, we gained intelligence, and we knew that we are going to enter the most complicated urban warfare ever waged anywhere around the world. There is nothing that we can compare this with because of several issues. First and foremost, the Gaza Strip is one of the most densely populated areas in the world. We know that. Those areas that are called refugee camps, those towns of very, very closely knit houses, no spaces between them, one on top of the other, small streets and so on. That's how most Palestinians live in that area, very small rural areas for agriculture and so on. A very extensive network of tunnels, of which we didn't know the extent. We now realize that it is more elaborate and longer, perhaps, than the London Tube. It is, or the New York Underground. It is just unimaginable 500 kilometers of tunnels going under an area of 365 square kilometers. Just imagine. And we know that the terrorists hide themselves underground. They put the population in harm's way. They use them as human shields. And we know that we have to get to them and try to avoid the population. The Israeli military has a special unit, legal advisors unit, that are embedded in the military operational units. So in the Air Force or the Army, everywhere. And they are instructed to make sure that the commanders act in accordance with our legal constraints, so international law, as applies also, of course, in Israel. And so everybody knows, and we've been doing that also in the past, even in Gaza, where it's not the first operation, but it's the most extensive one, that every decision may cost human lives. And so we had to make sure in advance that the decisions, the whole process, the whole tactics of the military will have to take into consideration the fact that it is a very densely populated area, and we have to try and distinguish between combatants and non-combatants, between areas that should be as regarded as safe zones as opposed to areas that are targets. And that's extremely complicated when you understand that Hamas, of course, is not wearing uniform and is hiding specifically very close to kindergarten, to mosques, to inside hospitals, underneath United Nations installations, actually also taking advantage of United Nations installations to hide weapons and munitions and so on, as we've shown and as we have also encountered in many places in Gaza Strip. So we embarked upon a very complicated military operation inside Gaza, knowing that we have three goals. One is to make sure that Hamas doesn't pose a threat to Israel, military threat to Israel anymore, that it does not continue to be the ruling power in Gaza, and that we get our hostages free. So having those goals stated, which are very broadly supported by the vast majority of Israeli politicians or population, we embarked upon this war. And we moved very slowly, very meticulously. But as we go, of course, we know that there are casualties. We can talk about the numbers. Perhaps now is a good time to speak about it. Usually in interviews, I'm just a second, David, I'm saying about when we're talking about the numbers that any casualty is horrific. We don't want anybody to die. The only issue is the numbers that are published by the Hamas-ruled Ministry of Health, which are, as we know, are always very exaggerated, inflated. We saw that with the Al-Hali hospital, where they spoke about 500 casualties when only a parking lot was hit by Islamic Jihad missile, by the way. So,
but we can all see, Ambassador, the images. I mean, I don't know about casualties, and I believe you, to be honest, that they're inflating the count. But we can all see that the place has been leveled, right? So what would have been wrong? What wouldn't have worked about a more targeted approach at the Hamas leadership?
The question of the leadership is only one part of our goals. When we are talking about eradicating Hamas, Hamas has actually when they took over the Gaza Strip in 2006 after Israeli military in Israel left this area. We vacated the Gaza Strip. We're not there. We weren't present there from 2006 until now. Hamas created a sort of a state-like military. They didn't rule this area as a country for the benefit of the population, but they did build a military structure comprised of tens of thousands of soldiers with munitions, with training from Iran, and so on. And they become what they are today. And so when you are fighting this magnitude of a military entity, you can't just go after the leadership, because the leadership is there, but the capabilities continue to be used. And we saw it also in the war. Even if we took some parts of the middle leadership or the higher, they continue to shoot at Israeli popular concentrations, and they kept on attacking us. And they still, by the way, they still continue to do that. So it's not just a question of the leadership, it's actually taking out their infrastructure. And to take out the infrastructure, which is embedded underneath a mosque, the mosque cannot stand if the mosque is the place where they're firing the rockets from. You see, it's very difficult to come in with a bulldozer and just go to that specific place and try to break it down. It's concrete, there are tunnels, and we want to destroy that infrastructure. And that has a price. So some parts of Gaza are indeed destroyed.
Competition, competitive fire, compete level. It's mid-spring in Canada, Stanley Cup playoffs. Flip on any sports media, every third sentence features a variation on the word. Into that glut, I offer these observations on competition, but from an entirely different arena. And for you Herle Burlyites who pay close attention to these ads, I'll just note that's a pun inside a segue. Not shockingly, it's the world of telecom. Even less shockingly, they're from our presenting sponsor, TELUS. First, some fresh data. Because of a more competitive landscape in Ontario, which I'll come back to in about 30 seconds, internet prices there are falling, 7.2% in March, over 26% in the last 12 months. When we widen the aperture, and you might have seen this quoted in the federal budget, StatsCan reports cell phone plan rates have declined 50% since December 2018. Also from StatsCan, while overall inflation ticked up to 2.9% in March from 2.8% in February, cell phone prices continued to fall, now 26% cheaper year on year than March 2023. Back to Ontario and their falling internet prices. There's a reason for it. New entrants into the competitive landscape, like Koodo, one of TELUS's flanker brands. Pre-Koodo internet in Ontario, wireline prices were historically stable, a fancy way of saying they didn't get any cheaper. That all began to change last October. Fact is, companies like Koodo, who invest in new markets and put real skin in the game, are best equipped to offer innovative service packages and price promotions and bring sustainable competition. TELUS isn't shy about it. They've already made a difference in Ontario. They want to make a bigger difference for more customers east. Compete harder. To sum that up, I'll just borrow the perfect words of the late, very great Bob Cole, the soundtrack of so many Stanley Cup playoffs. Oh, baby. How do you decide whether somebody in Gaza is complicit with Hamas's military objectives against Israel? I mean, I start from the assumption, and I believe I'm going to be approximately correct, that not one resident of Gaza believes that Israel should exist. And so that's fundamentally what you're facing, right? So who's a combatant and who isn't?
That's very hard to distinguish between those. It's very, very hard. We look at it from a very, we gain intelligence, and using that intelligence, and of course, either that or they are fighting, they're holding arms, and they're shooting at us. This is how we operate. So we get to those who are responsible for the money laundering, and we get to those who are responsible for smuggling their arms, but we also, of course, targeting those who are shooting into Israel. So it's a military, sort of a military-like paramilitary organization that has been able to equip itself and train itself to a level that have become simply said, an army, and they are disguising themselves as civilians. And actually, one of their targets and one of their tactics is to create as much damage as possible to civilian infrastructure, having civilian casualties, having civilians hurt, international organizations being targeted. That's their goal, because they know that by this, they increase the pressure on Israel to stop the fight, to give up, to allow them to continue their operations, because Hamas is indeed targeting Israel, will continue to do that, as we all know. They do it again and again and again. So that's the situation that we are facing. And so we are fighting a war against a military that doesn't really identify itself as a military, which has complete control over the numbers and the data that comes out of Gaza Strip, and also has complete control over the incoming international aid that goes into Gaza Strip. And we know that they are actually abusing it and taking it according to their priorities and the way they see things. So, and their goal is, the interim goal is to increase the pressure on Israel so it will stop the operation. And their end goal, of course, is to destroy Israel. So the call from the river to the sea is a part of Hamas covenant, for those who are not aware of it, which means that from the river Jordan, which is the eastern border of Israel, to the sea, which is the Mediterranean Sea, there will not be an Israel. There will only be an Islamic state, which the Hamas wants to set up according to their principles and rules. So when we are fighting this war, and I'm saying that there is a very broad support for it from all political parties and a very vast majority of the Israeli population, it is that because we understand that this is existential. It's not an organization that wants to reach some kind of compromise. They want to destroy Israel. And that is also the reason why we think that talking now about a two-state solution doesn't have really any sense, because it will be a reward for Hamas, who started this war, and give them a sort of an idea that if we slaughter as many Israelis as possible, we actually have a new political reality. And so let's continue with another military operation or terror attack, and then Israel will not exist anymore at all. So that's why the 99 out of the 120 Knesset members voted against or exactly for a motion that says not to talk about a two-state solution for the meantime until this operation is finished.
Great. I want to come back to that in a little bit, but I'm right now interested in how you feel about the reaction you're seeing to the war in Gaza in countries like Canada or the United States.
There are two kind of reactions, basically. You can divide it into support and of course criticism. So the support is overwhelming, and it's surprisingly very solid and strong. People understand that Israel has a right to defend itself. Actually, we're going as far as back as saying Israel has a right to exist, which is, I don't know, I don't think that anybody says to Canada has a right to exist. It's not the point. But there is a lot of support for Israel and a lot of understanding that we have to win this war. The criticism has different shades. So some of it will be around, well, you are creating too many casualties. So we spoke about that. And that's difficult, but we are doing the utmost as much as we can to avoid casualties for the non-involved population. The other part of criticism is more about, well, why don't you solve it politically? And so we are saying to that, there is no political solution. We can't negotiate with Hamas. They don't even want to negotiate about the time they'll kill us. They just want to kill us. It's as simple as that. And the other part is the more complicated and the more difficult and problematic criticism is about Israel's what I understand or what I hear is a sort of the use of terminology like genocide and so on, which is in my mind really mind-boggling, because first of all, I don't think that people realize what they're talking about when they're talking about genocide. Israel has the strongest military in the region, so if we would have been if that was our goal, then probably we've done a very bad job at it, because we could have done it a long time ago. It's nothing that has to do with genocide. I don't think people realize where genocide, the idea of combating genocide is coming from, and it is following the Second World War. We are very close to Holocaust Remembrance Day in Israel, and this month is also Jewish Heritage Month. It's time to speak about anti-Semitism. And genocide is a culmination of anti-Semitism to a level that was about to eradicate the entire Jewish people in the world. Yeah. So Israel is not complicit to that. And I think the International Court of Justice also said very clearly that there is no evidence for that, but they only gave the right to South Africa to present his case because they, in terms of legal presentation, their presentation makes sense for the court to rule over it, but nothing that has to do with the fact that is there any evidence of any kind of genocide. And of course, there isn't. When it comes to blaming Israel for being there, as we see in some of the campuses, that people say, well, Israel doesn't even have a right to exist. That's really the most problematic part, because that is going as far back as the creation of the State of Israel. And the fact that the United Nations was the organ that, with the resolution for the partition of Palestine, was the one that gave the foundation for Israel's legitimate existence. And people don't realize that. And people think that Israel was sort of something that has to do with the Second World War. No, it's the ancestral land of the Jewish people for thousands and thousands of years. And there's the Bible, and there are the continuous presence of Jews in Palestine, which is actually a Roman terminology.
When I grew up, Ambassador, when I grew up in Canada, my understanding is that from childhood was that Israel was a response to the Holocaust, was that the world had helped the Jewish people create Israel because they needed a home, because it was clear that they weren't going to be safe anywhere in the world, not Canada, right? And that they needed their own country. So I know that, I know the history goes back further, but the justification, and it's important because I don't think the current young people have that same justification in their heads. But there was a clear, in my mind, justification for why Israel existed.
So the justification for it came much earlier in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration, which was the foreign minister of the United Kingdom at the time, who said that the Jewish people have a right for a homeland in the region that was at that time described as Palestine, which included nowadays Israel and Jordan, by the way. And so if anybody refers to Palestine, that's the only border that exists, is actually Israel and Jordan together. But so the idea was the foundation for the modern recognition of the right of Jews to have a state in Israel came at as early as 1917, and from that on it developed. So the British mandate that started afterwards was supposed to create a state for the Jews and the state for the Arabs. 1947, the partition plan that the United Nations drew, by the way, with support of Lester B. Pearson, who was Undersecretary of State at the time, and was directly involved with the negotiations and so on, and in a very positive way for Israel. This partition plan made sure that there will be a Jewish state and an Arab state. And it's very important for two reasons to realize this. The partition plan was talking about Arab state, not a Palestinian state. And this terminology that we use today, Palestinian, my great-grandfather is buried on the Mount of Olives. There was no Israel at the time, so his ID, his identification was Palestinian. So am I Palestinian? the connection between the people of that time and today is something that needs to be elaborated on. It's elaborated on at some point in time. But Palestinian is actually derived from a name that Romans gave to that part of the land to change it from Judea, because they wanted to eradicate any connection between the Jewish people and that land. So the State of Israel is created because this is the homeland of the Jewish people for centuries and centuries, and they lived in Jerusalem, in Jaffa, and in Tiberias, and in Safat in the north. And this is a sort of a fact that, as you just said, not many people are aware of. But right to exist in this part of land has been established, been well accepted by the international community, and there is no doubt about that. But I think that what we're seeing today, and that is very, very, very worrying, that young people have no idea. And so very quickly they say, well, Israel actually doesn't have a right to exist. And they don't say that. They talk about Zionists. So
colonialization.
Yes. So I spoke to a Canadian Jew, a student, a while ago in the West, in Vancouver, and Victoria, and he told me a little story. He said, I was on a bus, and I saw this fellow student carrying a sign from the river to the sea. So he says, he walks up to her, and he asks her, do you know that actually this sign means ethnic cleansing? And she said, what are you talking about? So he shows her on the iPhone, he shows her, look, this is the border, this is the river, this is the sea. What you are calling for is actually ethnically cleansing this piece of land from Jews. So she looks up at him, and then she says, well, you're a Zionist. And he says, that's where the conversation stopped. So the term Zionist is now connected with something that people don't want to converse with, don't want to communicate with, because it represents to them something that is beyond their borders of acceptance. And this is worrying, because first and foremost, we are in a democracy. We're talking about tolerance. We're talking about compromise. We're talking about a lot of values that seem to be evaporating very quickly, and we don't realize that. And people are actually chanting for Osama bin Laden, which is crazy, or for glorifying October 7th massacre and rape and mutilation, all of that. So there is something that is fundamentally difficult for me to understand where it's coming from, but it's very important for young people to open books, to look, to read, to do stuff, to learn, to educate themselves about the past, so they'll understand the present better and take responsibility for the future in a way that will create a better world.
So next Sunday, that's May 5th, thousands of people will do a good thing and jump on their bikes or pull on their sneakers and rack up some mileage for the oncology department of the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario in Ottawa. Bless their hearts and generosity. The CN Cycle for CHEO, organized by our sponsor CN Rail, raises money for kids with cancer and their families. If there's a better cause than that, I'm not aware of it. Last year, more than 6,000 riders and walkers raised $1.8 million. That's a lot of help for families dealing with the disease. Things like radiation and surgery and chemotherapy and stem cell transplants are expensive, and we all know about the budget limitations Canadian hospitals are dealing with. Cancer treatments are brutal enough for anxious families, never mind the costs borne by parents who have to bring their kids in from out of town and want to stay by their sides during the procedures. The money that pours in from CN Cycle for CHEO sponsorships provides crucial relief. Anyway, the event has expanded terrifically in recent years. Last year's total has set a record. In the 16 years the event has been held, it has raised more than $13 million. This year, registrations are up, and so is the fundraising goal. This money makes the lives of sick children better, folks. If you live in Ottawa, consider getting out there and biking or running. If you can't, sponsor someone. It's simple to register online. The website address is cncycle.ca. Again, cncycle.ca. There's just no better way to spend your money or time. I think part of the problem, Ambassador, is that there's a huge difference in the way people outside of Israel see Israel and the way Israelis see Israel, in my opinion. In that Israelis see themselves as the underdog facing hostility and enemies all around them, constantly insecure and under threat. And people outside of Israel see Israel as a very strong country with a powerful military and support from the U.S. that makes Israel untouchable in the region. What are your thoughts on squaring those two circles?
Well, I can tell you a story. When I was in the Gulf,
like in the rest of the world, you're Goliath, and in Israel, you're David.
I agree.
Right?
It is something that is it originates, I think, from the Second World War, from our sense of vulnerability and the sense that we have to be able to defend ourselves no matter what. From the fact that we see constant attacks, we are trying to reach out a hand for peace, and we see terror attacks and suicide bombing and knives and what have you. And so we feel very vulnerable. And so we know for a fact that we have to be strong. But, I met some high-level official at some point in time in the Gulf. We didn't have any diplomatic relations at the time, but he told me a story. He saw a picture of two Israeli F-16s fighter jets flying over Auschwitz in Poland, over Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland. He saw a picture of that. And that was done several years earlier. And he said to me, I looked at that picture and I tried to understand, why is this so important to you? He said, I realized that in your eyes, you are existentially threatened. You don't want the Holocaust to repeat itself, so you have to be strong. And I was very impressed because he was able to see the picture through my eyes, as you just described, that Israelis feel this sense of vulnerability that has to do with the Holocaust. But to outsiders, he says to me, you have such a strong military. You don't really need that. So now we can debate, after Iran attacked Israel with a barrage of 400 missiles, do we really need a strong military or not? We do. We need technology and we need help. We saw that even with all our might, we needed more help from the US and UK and others, and Arab countries. So the sense that I think is most important for, if I understand your question correctly, why there is such a gap in Israeli minds that you are so strong while the world sees you as a sort of a Goliath, is that we are trying to bridge that with reaching out to the world, with bringing out technology and innovation and agriculture and medical, R&D and stuff like that, sort of a spirit that shows the world that we are different, that we are not this kind of a Goliath, which we don't feel we are, but we know we have to be very strong. And this is something that is very strong among all Israelis. We have to be very strong, because if we're not, we'll be eliminated. And of course, nowadays, everybody will tell you in Israel, well, look what happened. And even if we're that strong, Hamas attacked us, inflicted so much damage, and there is Hezbollah in the north, and there is the Houthis, and Iraq, and Syria, and the West Bank, and all of that, and Iran behind all of it. So if we don't have a very, very strong military, we will for surely be eliminated. The question really is nowadays, I think the changing situation in the Middle East, if we take this to the political arena, your question, I think part of the answer will be that we will have more concrete, not just ad hoc, but more concrete long-term arrangements with our neighbors regarding peace and security in the region, so that we share some of the burden of creating stability and security for all of us, not just Israelis, but also others. I mean, just remember Jordan, for example, is a country that lies between Iran and Israel. They are in a line of fire. They know that they may also be threatened. So there are many other countries in the Gulf as well, and perhaps beyond, that are interested in establishing stability, security for themselves together with Israel.
Just leapfrogging off of that, Ambassador, one of the things I also thought was interesting in my conversations in Israel was that I think in Canada, most people think of this as a conflict between two traditional combatants and confined to that. Whereas the people I talked to in Israel, many of them felt that they were on the front lines of a much bigger fight that had to do with the defense of liberal democracy in the world and the Western way of life. Do you see it that way?
To a certain extent, absolutely. When I'm looking back into history and I'm reading, for example, what Lester Pearson said about the conflict when he first encountered the discussions in the United Nations. I read about it because we are marking very soon the 75th anniversary of bilateral relations, and we believe that Lester B. Pearson's legacy in that context is very impressive because he was willing and interested to have Canadian commitment.
He's almost the only prime minister we can all agree on, Ambassador. In Canada,
so,
right? Yeah, you can say Lester Pearson, everybody go, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So he made a big difference for us. And this is something that I think we need to mark, and this is what we'll do very soon. So he wrote in his memoirs that he encountered this sort of venom from Arab representatives towards the Jewish state, the emerging Jewish state, that he felt was very hard to fathom. It was very emotional. It was very irrational. And so there is something that is unique in some of our enemies' minds when they are talking about the elimination of the state of Israel. Today, Hamas speaks to that based on their religious interpretation of the Quran, but there may be other sources. I don't know. But the point is that there is some very basic, very deep hate against Israel among some of our neighbors. And so that's local. What is broader is the sense that Jewish people don't have a right to exist. And beyond that, I think it's a sort of a struggle between what we call a liberal democratic world and culture, the Judeo-Christian tradition, and others that oppose it. And so in that sense, I think that Israel is on the front line, because when you see that regimes that oppress their own people use all their resources to aim to destroy the state of Israel, it's because they see Israel as a threat to them, because they see that as a threat to their way of running and ruling their own countries. You see, we have nothing against the people of Iran. I think they are very brave when they go out and they protest, but they have a brutal regime that doesn't allow them to do that very much. So that regime sees Israel as an enemy in that sense, for sure. And so, yes, we are in a location that is also an inflection point between East and West, some would say, or between a sort of more democratic liberal world and other kind of world which is darker, which is controlled by dictatorships and so on. And in that sense, definitely what will happen, I think Professor Kotler always says, it starts with the Jews, it never ends with the Jews. That's where you can definitely say that.
Right. So how does this end, Ambassador? Like, how do you know when Hamas has been destroyed to the point where it no longer represents a threat to Israel? And what does that leave behind? What's the post-Hamas world look like?
Hamas will be destroyed when Hamas doesn't have an infrastructure and doesn't have the resources, the human resources, to attack Israel. The idea of
are we close to that? Like, I mean, is this going to go on for many, many more months, or are we close to an end, or how is it shaping up?
We feel we are close to it. We have a very big problem with Rafah, as I mentioned very early on. Rafah is still there. There are 4 battalions, Hamas battalions, hiding in the tunnels under 1.5 million refugees. That is what that's their security guarantee. And so, but they're still there, and the leadership is there, and 133 hostages are still held there. And so it will be over when we get our hostages back. Actually, it could be over an hour from now. If Hamas releases the hostages and lay down the weapons, it's finished. It's done.
How come nobody's even asking them to surrender? I mean, shouldn't that be a precondition to ceasefire, that the attackers surrender? I mean, that's how it works in world history, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it should, and it doesn't. Yeah. Yes. It's horrific. I mean, you're laughing rightly, but it is mind-boggling. But that's the fact. That's really the fact. So Hamas will be defeated. And the other part of the question, or the second question that you ask, is what are we looking at? We're looking at...
I mean, they're the government, just to be clear for my listeners, they're the government of Gaza, right? And
Right,
for a long
absolutely.
time now, they've been the people that, they're not just fighting Israel, they're also providing social services, and they, to the extent that there's an administration, they're it.
Yeah, they're it. And they're actually also using their religious understanding, interpretation of Islam to instill that also in the population. So there is no tolerance for LGBTQ. There is no tolerance for any dissent, political dissent. They have a very easy way of resolving family disputes if it becomes real serious, and they are not very, very democratic or very easygoing in the way they solve problems. So that regime, I think, is very harsh and very difficult for Palestinians to live under. But it's not up to Israel to decide who is going to govern the Palestinians. It's up to them. The only expectation that we have is that it will be a sort of a government. It can be a rock band. It can be anything, as long as it accepts Israel's right to exist, and as long as it is a peaceful entity. And
but it's not going to be that decrepit, corrupt old Palestinian Authority, is it? It's going to have to be something new.
It has to be something new. I agree with you. It's going to be a new version of the Palestinian Authority, or it can be called anything else. That's really something that needs to be worked out. But, we have Palestinians living inside Israel who are law-abiding, very productive and supportive members of society. They may be very critical of Israel. They are members of the Knesset. They are judges in the Supreme Court. They are lawyers. They are pharmacists. They are everywhere. And so if they have an issue, they can bring it up and have it resolved. They may not always be happy, but ultra-Orthodox people are in Israel not always very happy, or the secular people are not always very happy. That's a democracy. That's how we live. So the Palestinians
there are apparently some Canadians right now who are not very happy with their government.
I cannot imagine that.
No, I can't.
I cannot. I thought it was a different kind of a regime. So, yes, that's how it works. Nobody's really happy at any time, even if you're in government or you're not in government. You're not always happy. That's how we live. We always make compromises. And we know that we will never get 100% of what we want, but we will work more than 100% to attain what we believe in, but we'll do it in a peaceful, respectable way within the law. So I think that Israeli Palestinians have shown to Palestinians that are under the Palestinian Authority that there is an alternative. We are waiting for a new wave of leadership to emerge that will take responsibility for their lives in that way. I mean, Palestinian leadership, Abu Mazen is, 80-something. He still has to grow up. He's always complaining. He's always saying, but they did to me there, but they don't allow me, but I can't. Nobody gives me, nobody tells me. This kind of immaturity is something that is embedded in Palestinian Authority for many, many years. And I've met a lot of Palestinians who are different, who will not always agree with me, who may have a lot of issues with me and claims. But we've been working on joint committees on resolving water issues. Anybody knows that? That for many, many years, Israelis and Palestinians were discussing together how we resolve water issues. There's a lot of issues with water because water is scarce in our part of the world. And so we have to be very careful with the resources and combat contamination and illegal pumping and whatever it is. And we've been doing that for many, many years. That stopped at one point. We will resume it. We have very good security cooperation. Nobody talks about that because that's something that, we better keep behind the scenes, but it's there because we have very clear mutual interest in that as well. So between Israelis and Palestinians, there are a huge number of common interests, and the common denominator is much bigger than we think it is. The thing is that without a real, serious, strong, solid, responsible, and accountable government on the Palestinian side, it's very difficult to move forward. And we're talking about two-state solution, and the question that I'm asking, well, I think that at this point in time, the majority of Palestinians want a one-state solution, which doesn't include Israel. So it's not really up to us to say we are for a two-state solution.
They have never wanted a two-state solution.
Well, no, there are. I beg to differ. There are some that are. You know, King Abdullah, the great-grandfather of the current king, Jordan King, was reached out to the Zionist movement at the time, long before the establishment of the State of Israel, to talk about coexistence. And there are a lot of moderate Palestinians and moderate Arabs around Israel and in the Palestinian areas that are interested in living together and actually, developing a life that is not focused on destroying the other, but is actually revolves around their own development, their own success, their own careers and lives and stories and so on. And when that time comes, when these kind of people take over the leadership, that's when we'll have a better solution. So what I'm saying is, when we look into the future, we have to look at the Arab-Palestinian side for them to take responsibility of their future in a way that will also make it work. It's not just us.
Okay. I got a follow-up to that, though, which is, I'm going to try to thread a needle here, and I was going to see if I can thread it. I think the very few people in Canada thought that the attacks of October 7th were justified in any way, shape, or form. Okay? At the same time as thinking that, though, I think many, many Canadians think that the long-term terrible standard of living for Palestinians created an environment where such a thing could happen. How can things get better for the Palestinian population in the West Bank and Gaza?
That's a very concrete question that has I'll give you a very concrete answer. In one word, UNRWA. Have we spoken about UNRWA today? We haven't. So the UNRWA is a special agency that was set up by the Palestinians and then taken over by the United Nations, a relief agency to support the Palestinian refugees. It came into place when the State of Israel was erected. As I said, after the partition plan, the Arab declared a war against Israel. That war ended in some truce line, armistice line that was signed between Israel, Jordan, and Egypt. And so there were Palestinian Arabs who fled the areas where they lived, and they became refugees. And these people came under the organization called UNRWA. The United Nations has another relief organization, the new UNHCR. That organization is taking care of all the refugees around the world, but Palestinian refugees fall under a separate organization. For 70 years, they've been under UNRWA, and they are still refugees. All other refugees around the world, their issues have been resolved within years. So one should ask himself, why is those Palestinians that UNRWA has been taking care of still refugees? Is it because UNRWA doesn't work, or is it because something's wrong with the organization called UNRWA that perpetuates the status of refugees? And when I spoke about these densely populated areas in Gaza, they are called refugee camps, even though the United Nations and the international community have donated billions and billions of dollars for the Gaza Strip to develop itself in a way that will create a better livelihood for the population there. All that money went into tunnels and so on. UNRWA is part of that problem. UNRWA is under control of Hamas, and UNRWA perpetuates the status of refugees, also educates for hatred of Israel. There are school books, that's been shared also here, I think, by Bnei Brit several months ago also, are calling for hate, and they are demonizing Israelis and Jews, of course, and they are telling the story of Israeli taking lands of Palestinians and so on. So UNRWA is part of that problem. So when we are talking about something that needs to be fundamentally changed. This is one of the issues that is extremely important, that can be done very quickly right now when UNRWA is defunded and they are found other ways to provide aid and assistance to the Palestinians, like the UNHCR, like the World Food Program, like so many other organizations that now have to work with UNRWA because they monopolize all the venues for assistance.
What about the things we hear, Ambassador, about the ways Israel makes life difficult in the West Bank and Gaza for the people living there in terms of controlling how they move and when they move and checkpoints and just generally sort of controlling the activity in that area? Is that, I mean, I don't pretend to even remotely understand Israel's security needs, but is that all necessary?
We feel it is, because as long as there is no viable entity that controls the security on the Palestinian side, as long as their their security operation is lax in the influence of Iran and other terrorist organizations, proxies of Iran, who are, we know, smuggling arms into the West Bank and all of that, we have to be there. And that presence is very cumbersome because we have to make sure, and we are continuing to find and arrest terrorists, because we see that they are accumulating arms and they're attacking Israelis, whether it's on the West Bank, whether it's in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem or anywhere. We've just had an attack. We had a Turkish tourist who attacked Israelis in Jerusalem the other day, the old city of Jerusalem. So security is extremely important. It's necessary and it's problematic. It's also problematic for Israelis. For me, it's a novelty going into a mall here in Ottawa. I don't have to open my bag. It's something that every Israeli is very familiar with doing. So we know that security is important. When I'm going to work, sometimes I have to go through some kind of a crossing. So I stop there and they ask me a question and I go on. That's the way it is. That's the reality for the whole region.
Right. Okay. I want to end with just a forward-looking question, which is, as a supporter of Israel, I don't like what I'm seeing in the demographic trend lines, especially via age in the Western world. I don't think that Israel is very secure if it's isolated and if it doesn't have broad support around the world. But it's pretty clear that younger generations do not see Israel the same way that the previous generations in the Western world have seen Israel. Maybe it's the Holocaust is too distant now. Maybe it's the lens through which college-educated people understand the world now. Maybe it's a long, long stretch of right-wing government in Israel. I don't know what it is. But how much does that concern you? And do you have any thoughts on how to build support and understanding for Israel among that cohort?
I don't want young people to see Israel through the lens of Holocaust or history. It's part of us. It's part of who we are. It's just as important to know about the history of Canada and where Canadians are coming from. But I think Israel should be seen as for what it is: a vibrant democracy, very colorful, with beautiful art, with beautiful music and stuff, but also as a very enterprising community and population. Innovative, one that is very much seeking to work together with the rest of the world on any kind of the most cutting-edge developments and technologies, be it cybersecurity. We haven't spoken about that, but that's okay. But it can be also in communication.
I don't know anything about it. I don't even know where the first question to ask is.
I'll tell you. And it can be in food technology, and it can be in quantum, and it can be in AI that is relevant and prevalent actually in all what we are doing. Israelis are facing the same challenges that the whole world is facing: food shortage, climate change, issues of what kind of a government do we want for the future generations? Do we really want to continue to do things the way we did in the past? Do we want to change it? You'll find a very diverse community and very open. And I think that up until very recently, these contacts were very open, very frequent, very fluid. And what has changed, I think, is that a small group of people came out with a very, very negative narrative about Israel and Israelis, and created a sort of an image which is not in line with what has happened until then. So it's not that that world of until October the 7th evaporated. The world has changed. Everything has changed since October, and it will not be the same. But we have to, when things subside, when we look at each other again and say, wait a minute, so what has happened here? We'll have to see the way Israel has been fighting this war, what has happened inside Israel, and the resilience I was speaking about. And we have to speak about what is changing also here on the streets of Canada, because there are new phenomena that had never been witnessed in the past. And I'm hearing from the Jewish community the level of anti-Semitism, but we're also hearing some other very aggressive and behavior and demonstrations and manifestations that also never took place.
Well, listen, people are throwing around easily two of the ugliest words in the English language: apartheid and genocide.
Yeah.
Right? And associating them with Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they like that. It's, I mean, those people who say it very often without having any idea that, I mean, if Israel did indeed conduct apartheid in Israel, it failed completely because, as I mentioned earlier, the Arab community is so well integrated into everything and anything that's happening in Israel. And they took part also in rescuing Israelis out of the attack on October the 7th. And since then, of course, being very proactive in defense and reconstruction. So there is a sort of a clash of realities here, because this virtual reality that people use to be able to shout whatever, genocide and apartheid, this has no foundation in reality. And I think that what is extremely important right now is for younger people to really educate themselves by themselves. And, when we're looking at social media...
Do that. They will not do that.
So I understand what you're saying. And I'm saying social media is an issue. We're sort of an echo chamber. And so you don't really see the opposing ideas. But this can be changed. And we can work on that to actually push information to those who are really not interested. But, I think that there is a very big majority of people who are actually open to the idea of what I've been talking about when I'm talking about Israel. They're not inherently hateful against Israel, but they sort of, go along with the idea. You hear so many students saying, well, I'm here for the demonstration. I'm not sure what it is about. And you ask them, what's from the river to the sea? Which river are we talking about? They have no idea. Or which sea, or where Israel is, or how big Israel is. Does anybody know that Israel is smaller than St. Edward's Island? I mean, I don't think so. And so people have an idea that Israel may have 100 million population, and a lot of things that are not based in reality. And just having the basics in line with what you're saying is something that I know is sometimes beyond young people. So we hope they'll grow up a little bit and still go and educate themselves. But it's up to us also to push to them the ideas that things are different than what they perceive, and that if they want to see a better world for themselves, they have to take responsibility, not just to shout things, but actually to make a difference in a responsible way. And responsible means listening to both sides and then contemplating what is the right way to move forward.
The first time I went, one of the things that really just struck me the most, and I knew it, but I didn't know it, is how small it is.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think it's possible for Canada to really understand how small the amount of land we're talking about is and how close hostile people are.
When you look at the distance between the West Bank and the sea, that part that is Israel right now, and you understand that is 10 kilometers. 10 kilometers. It's, I think, the length of the Rideau Canal. It's incredible. And so you see it is extremely small. Sometimes when official guests come to Israel, we take them by helicopter. Because if you go by helicopter, you see it takes you about half an hour from one side to the other. And that's it. That's it. There's nothing there, nothing else. And yes, the level of animosity is also something that is very hard to experience, because you just enter a place, Arab country. I think Israelis are not that eager to go into Cairo, but I think that if you would, you will may perhaps feel a sense of insecurity. because, you never know. And I'm not saying it because I think that any Egyptian will attack them. To the contrary, they don't mind. They are, everybody goes about their own lives. But the sense that now, especially after October 7th, those images are coming back to many people. That makes a lot of people very insecure. And this is why many Israelis say, well, listen, we'll talk about a two-state solution, but let's first talk about our own security. And so going back into what is happening inside Israel, we have this organization called Brothers in Arms that came together. They were among the leading protesters against the judicial reforms from January that were introduced by, or were supposed to be introduced by Netanyahu. On October the 7th, they pivoted their activities, and they became an organization that was providing for those who evacuated their northern border with Hezbollah or the southern border with Gaza, support soldiers, set up labs to identify the footage, through their footage that Hamas took, horrific footage, who is alive, who is abducted. They've done magnificent work. And so these kind of people are actually making a very big difference for Israel right now. And they are the ones that will also take responsibility for the future of Israel. That's my belief. And so people are changing also inside Israel. The sense of vulnerability is there, but also the sense of empowerment that, as a citizen, you can make a difference through these kind of organizations. And that gives me a lot of hope. And I'm looking also into our neighbors' eyes, and I'm saying, do the same. Make a difference. Be involved. You don't have to be Zionist. You don't have to be pro-Israeli. You just want to have your own life next to your neighbor's life. So you have to be a peaceful neighbor. And we have to learn how to do that. And if we are good, peaceful neighbors, that's beneficial for both of us, because sometimes we could just mow the lawn together and do some other things that are beneficial for both of us. Who knows?
I don't think the status quo is really sustainable internationally, politically. I think that Israel's standing in the world and its reputation are going to be dependent upon people seeing, and I don't think it's Israel's job alone, by the way. I think it's the world's job. But I think people need to see a serious good faith effort to improve the quality of life for the Palestinian population or the Arab population living in those occupied territories. Is that possible?
First of all, yes. The answer, of course, is yes. But this is something for when the Palestinians want to govern their own lives, and they've had multiple opportunities to receive, and they received billions of dollars of donations. One should ask himself, what has happened with all that money? Why don't we see an enterprising Palestinian industry? Why don't we see Palestinian towns? We have one, Rawabi, which is an exemplary location, how things can be done if Palestinians really take full responsibility for their own destiny and build a beautiful city. But beyond Rawabi, there are very few other examples because of political problems inside the Palestinian political scene. So there is a level that there is so much that the world can do. There's so much that Israel can do to facilitate, to support, to help with what we can. The international community can do also so much. I'll just give you an example. There's Jordan River. Have you had a chance to visit it ever?
May have been the most disappointing part of Israel for me. The mighty Jordan River is a creek.
It's a creek, exactly. Yes. It's a creek.
Yeah.
So now imagine this: the creek is the borderline between Israel and Jordan, and there are just 3 crossing points. They are always overloaded with people going back and forth. So if you want to develop an industry on the West Bank and you want them to be able to ship their goods to the Gulf, you want to create another route, another option for them to cross. So Japanese decided they'll pitch in and they'll build a bridge. Now just imagine, how long does it take to build a bridge over a creek? Can take more than, I don't know what. And don't say anything about which country does things faster or slower. It doesn't take that long. It took about 8 years to build that bridge. Why did it take that 8 years? Because there were a lot of issues. Security issues from our side, I can tell you, from here to eternity. There is the issue of working things out with Jordanians on the other side. There's the issue of Palestinians. Very, very complicated. It works. The bridge exists, and Palestinian goods are being transported over that bridge to the Gulf and being shipped, and they're being exported to the rest of the world. So with commitment and tenacity and so on, it's possible to make a difference. But that's a very small one, and there is so much more that needs to be done. But there needs to be, especially on the Palestinian side, I think, much stronger leadership that will really be accountable and active and responsible and proactive and will work towards a solution. It's complicated because Iran has infiltrated much of Palestinian society through Hamas, and the radicalization process is very advanced. Again, UNRWA with the school books and things that are have been instilled in young people's minds that are very difficult to change. But my only hope, or my only prayer actually is, look at Israel. Look what's happening with Israeli Arabs. Look at their lives and look how different it is than yours. If you want to have that kind of a life, you have to make a difference in your own area. We are responsible for security. We have a lot of responsibility with the Palestinians, and we are doing as much as we can to support that. But we cannot determine their destiny. It's not up to us. The Palestinians, the Arab state that was supposed to be erected when the United Nations the partition plan came into place, that still has to be created. But it has to be created in a way that will not threaten the future of Israel. And that's something that still needs to be worked out. It's very complicated, and I'm not optimistic at all. I don't think that things will get better anytime soon. It will take a long while. We have to solve a very big challenge in the north. We haven't spoken about tens of thousands of Israelis who evacuated the northern border because their houses have been destroyed by Hezbollah. Nobody knows that hundreds and hundreds of homes have been shot at and destroyed by Hezbollah, and Israelis have been killed by Hezbollah. And they are provoking, and they're trying to escalate the situation there as well. They are a proxy of Iran.
And they're a direct Iran proxy, right? Yes, you just said that. Yeah.
Yes. And they have rockets, precision-guided rockets, they have about 150,000 of them aimed at all over Israel. That threat is still there. And, they have this shaky hand of Hassan Nasrallah over the red button. The guy is not a rational guy. He's been hiding, by the way, in a bunker since 2006, since the Lebanon war. But he is threatening all the time to attack the whole of Israel. He has the same agenda as Hamas. So he calls it to liberate Jerusalem. Whatever it is, it's extremely dangerous. So I don't see things happening very quickly. The issue with the Palestinians is one issue, but the regional problem is really Iran, and we have to address that. And that's where the international community has a very important role to play. And starting with Lebanon, where already the United Nations Security Council had decided that there needs to be an area to the north of the border that is empty of any threat to Israel, and Lebanon does not follow it, and Hezbollah is there. And if you've been to that border, you may have seen Hezbollah soldiers standing on the fence. Physically, you can almost touch them. They are just across from you. So that threat still exists, and we have to address that. And that's where, as I said, the international community has to come in, because it needs to be a diplomatic solution. Otherwise, it may be a military one, and we don't want that. So that's also a very pressing problem. So this needs to be addressed as well, not just Rafah and not just the Gaza Strip.
Ambassador, I've taken up a lot of your time. I'm so grateful for this conversation. Very thoughtful, very informative, very reflective. And I genuinely appreciate your time. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Nice to be with you. It's a pleasure. Yeah. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail. And thank all of you Herle Burlyites out there who listen to the show. And come back next week and there'll be more. Something. We'll see you then. Take care.